Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. It's Leon. Today, I want to talk about this idea of modelers sounding fake and digital and what you can do about it. The first thing is, what on earth do people mean when they say, hey, this unit sounds fake or this unit sounds really digital and I don't like it? I think what you need to do before you start, jumping on forums and things like that and talking about, hey, my tone sucks, it sounds fake, it sounds digital, is to use better descriptive words when you're talking about your sound. Saying something sounds fake in regards to audio is nonsense. Saying something sounds digital means you actually don't know what you're talking about, although you suspect that you've done some reading and someone said at some point that, hey, this sounds really digital and this sounds really analog, but they are just buzzwords that you're parroting that you don't know what they mean. Use descriptive words about tone. For example, if you don't like the tone, maybe talk about, hey, the low end is boomy, or I don't like the high end, or the mids are too scooped, or there's no dynamics in the sound when I play it, or it's not touch sensitive when I play it. Understanding what all of these words mean in regards to audio means you have to do a lot of listening and you have to do a lot of playing. So basically, you have to make sure that you don't suck. So assuming that, say you've got a model like the Fractal Axe 8 that we've got at the moment, I'm going to show you a couple of troubleshooting tips if you plug in and your tone absolutely sucks. So the first thing, have a listen to how awful this sounds. I've got a Friedman BE. I'm going to load up a 4x12 cab, which normally sounds awesome together. A factory 149. This is an own hammer mix. So plug it in and you go, awesome, I'm about to be blown away by the tone, and then it sounds like this. It sounds like you DI'd a PV Rage or something like that. That, besides from sounding awful, is the result of you having the global menu power amp modeling and cabinet modeling turned off. So if you press the shift button on your Axe 8 and then the store button, you go to setup. There will be 1, 2, 3. The first thing will be global. So hit enter and go into there and it brings up the global menu. This is on the front panel of your Axe 8. And the first two parameters are power amp modeling and cabinet modeling. So have a listen to this. I'm going to turn the power amp modeling. It's currently off and the cabinet modeling is off. So even though I've got a cab loaded, it's not doing anything and it sounds like, yeah, it sounds really good. Hey, so let's turn power amp modeling on. Okay, there's a little bit of like low end thump in there now, which is nice, but it's still buzzy because there's no cab. And I'm going to go and turn the cab on. Let's have a listen to that. Oh, now it sounds like a guitar amp. Awesome. It's also not quite as loud. That is because of the level here. I'm going to bring that up a little bit. So there we go. That's always my first port of call. The reason you might turn those off is if you're using your Axe 8 solely as a preamp with a true power amp, you want to turn power amp modeling and cab modeling off with your presets. Or if you're running it into a solid state power amp, you want to leave power amp modeling on, but the cab modeling off. And it's easy to make these adjustments and forget about them. So that is reason number one why your tone may absolutely suck and why it might sound fake and digital. Or in this case, sounds like there's absolutely no dynamics and there's no shape to the tone, basically. You've got lots of high-end fizz. You've got no post EQ on it that the cab provides. All right, so given that your cab is on and your power amp modeling is on, the second thing to think about, how loud are you playing and what monitors are you using? And this is obviously really, really hard to demo, but if you're playing on headphones, or you're playing on, a monitor that is not flat or full range, or you've got power amp modeling and cab modeling on and you're plugging to the front of a guitar amp, these are all recipes for, very, very average tone. In the first case, no, I shouldn't say that about headphones. You can get great tones through headphones, but be aware that when you're playing through headphones, you eliminate a large part of the, experience that you will get when you play a loud amplifier, which is the sort of feedback and reinforcement you get from air moving against the guitar and, providing feedback and providing extra overtones and things like that. Headphones are obviously going to eliminate that, and they're a different playing experience. But if you are using headphones with your Axe 8, invest in a good set of headphones that, I've got Audio Technicas, which sound pretty good. They're relatively accurate for headphones. Don't play your guitar through, a really crappy pair of PC monitors or, iPhone speakers. Those things are trash if you want good tone. So invest in a good set of headphones or invest in a good set of monitors. I use Atom A7Xs. They're expensive, but so is the Fractal stuff. If you're gonna invest in a great floor unit, or whether you're using a Helix or a Kemper like that, get some good studio monitors to use at home. Or if you're not playing at home, if you're playing live, get a good FR wedge. So many companies out there that you can choose from and read about on the forums. Which brings me to the second issue there. Once you've got a good flat kind of monitor, the volume that you're playing at is really, really important. If you're at home listening to this, I'm going to play a riff, and I want you to turn your volume control up from really quiet to as loud as it will go while I'm playing the riff. So here we go. And I apologize, I'm a little bit out of tune there. But what you would have noticed is that as you turn the volume up, the low end and the high end become far more pronounced than the mid-range, relative to the mid-range, I should say. That's something called the Fletcher-Munson effect. So if you're dialing in tones to play at really high volume, dial them in when you've got the volume really high, because you will need less low end and less high end to cut through in that situation. If you're playing at home and the volume's not too loud, you're probably going to want to crank the bass and the treble, which is the reason why a lot of factory presets in this unit sound dull. They're designed to be played at high volume where the low end and the high end gets blown out, and that is a biological thing that happens with the human ear, the Fletcher-Munson effect. Go and read up about it. Okay, if you're playing at, an appropriate volume and you've got the right monitor choice and you still think your tone is, high end's too boomy, low end's too boomy, the high end's too harsh. In the cab block, we can solve all of this stuff by using the low cut and the high cut. I'm actually going to go ahead and tune my guitar while I'm doing this, so I'm not annoying you all with out-of-tune guitar while I'm ranting about, the merits of guitar tone that does and doesn't suck. I'm playing a Les Paul with a Seymour Duncan JB in the bridge and a Jazz in the neck, by the way. All right, and you can hear me tuning. Oh, God, this is the worst thing ever. And we're back. So, this particular impulse to me, there's just a little bit too much flub in the low end. So what I like to do is, you can play around with the low cut. I like to start at about 80 hertz. So let's hear the difference. You can hear that low subby kind of thing is gone. You might want to go to 120 or 150, depending on the type of thing you're going for. 120 sounds pretty good here. And the other thing to play around with is, my mistake there. I'm getting sloppy with my mouse. You can play around with a high cut as well if you think it's too... Do not set it at 800. This is going to be so bad. Oh, rubbish. Set it at 8,000 maybe. You can hear the difference between that and if I've got it wide open. And that top end phenomena, what you're hearing obviously is an impulse of a guitar speaker cabinet recorded with a microphone running through a preamp. The close miking of a cab introduces a bunch of proximity effects. Where you place the microphone means it's going to be more sensitive to certain frequencies, the type of speaker you use, all that kind of stuff. Means that if you set the high cut wide open, you get what I call sizzle in the top end. So you get these, it's kind of this shh kind of noise happening. So that can be really good if you're playing live with a band, but it can also be the reason, some people think modelers sound fake and digital. So some people think they sound fake and digital if you attenuate the high end too much, If you don't attenuate the high end, it can sound fake and digital, because think about it, most of the recorded guitar tones you listen to feature a lot of post EQ. It's an amp that's mic'd up, that's run through a preamp, that in post is, it's mixed to sit in with a band. And if you want to listen to some great guitar, pick your favorite guitar tone from an album and then try to find, go on YouTube or something, try to find that tone isolated, and it will probably sound terrible on its own, but it works great in the mix. So that's another thing that's really important. What sounds great on its own doesn't necessarily sound great in a mix. But let's get rid of some of that shh, which some people would describe as fake and digital, but I just call that harsh top end. Let's try about 8K. That's almost a little too dark for what I like, but we'll leave it there. The other important cab lock parameter is a proximity effect, which kind of emulates, a microphone being really close to the cab. I only set it about 1 or 2. And that, to me, reintroduces some of the, for better use of a term, thump. When you play with a real amp in a room, you get these really strong low transients. The classic saying, you turn up so loud that you feel it. The Marty McFly thing, where it wants to blow you back. That's what the proximity effect here is doing. And you can obviously change that frequency. I like it at 120. I think it sounds great. So there we go. We have tweaked the cab parameters and the cab choice, and hopefully this is sounding, if you think these units sound harsh and digital or anything like that, this is how you can dial some of that out. And of course, harsh, fake, digital, we've talked about the top end being harsh. We've talked about the boomy bass. Let's talk about dynamics, because that is another massive factor in this fake and digital thing that a lot of people throw around. What I'm talking about, of course, is, you're playing your guitar and you're absolutely smashing the strings. And then you play really softly. Now, on a modeler that isn't touch sensitive, or, something like an early pod, you'd play really, really hard. You play really soft. And there wouldn't be a whole lot of change between the amount of gain happening there, or the way it feels, I guess. Basically, there's far less dynamic range, meaning that everything's super compressed and that there's this almost like linear response. You play a little bit harder and you get a little bit more gain. Amplifiers don't work like that. If you've ever played a vintage Marshall, or you've played, one of the numerous modern clones on the market, you know that you can have a beautiful, sweet singing clean tone almost, and then hit the strings really hard and it explodes into overdrive. And that's part of the magic of playing an amp, You've got that kind of thing if I roll the volume back, playing softly, and then I crack it. That's where the magic is at. And, I think if you want to play it around with dynamics in the Axe-8, the input drive is really, really important. Because, how many guys do this? Oh, cool, a high gain amp. 10, yeah, fun. Oh, I'm going to turn the boost on as well. Sick. Oh, there's saturation. I want more of that. Yeah. Turn that up. This is so good. Gain's good. Input trim. Yeah, I'm going to turn that up too. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to put a drive pedal in front of this. Yeah. What's the best drive? I'm going to use a Metal Zone, because the Metal Zone's awesome. It's getting noisy, so I need a gate, a crazy gate. Yeah. If you're doing this kind of process, you're going to get this. Whether you play hard or soft here does not matter. It's so compressed and so distorted that it's all going to be the same. Soft, hard, soft, hard. So yeah, if you're setting up your presets like that with all the gain and all the compression and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have there's no dynamic range. Distorted guitar, fully distorted guitar doesn't have dynamic range. Whereas most amplifiers can't do that, which is why they sound good and why they have dynamic range. So play around with your gain structure. If you want an edge of breakup kind of sound, like we were just talking about, a Friedman BE probably isn't the best amp for this, but don't be afraid to turn the gain all the way down. Like, that's quite a nice... edge of breakup kind of thing. And then, you might want to kick a drive pedal in front of that. One of my favorite ones is the FET Boost. I've got a preset for it here. So... and it still retains that sense of dynamics, which I like, but then if I want to play a guitar solo, I've got more gain. And that, to me, is, the way I would set up a normal rig. The other thing that's really important is, while we're talking about gain staging, is to play around with the EQ. If you're playing really, really loud, I find with a lot of these models, and you've got the presence control cranked, the louder that goes, the more of that Fletcher Munson effect you get, and the more of that kind of ice pick high end you get. So I actually like to turn the presence, I'm quite conservative with the presence there, and, to make up for it, you might want to turn the treble up, or you might want to turn the bright switch up. And the advantage of turning the bright switch on is that changes the gain structure. You get a little bit more gain with that. The master volume is super important as well. If you set it low and compensate for it with the level, let's set it to about 2. You're going to get, much like a real amplifier, you're getting your gain from the preamp there. Whereas if you turn the level down, and man, I'm all thumbs today. I apologize about that. And crank the master volume, you're going to be getting some power amp distortion, which has a very different character. And this tends to smooth out the low end, but also tends to smooth out the high end, I should say, but also tends to make the low end a little flubby. I mean, that's great if you want sort of, use of a better term, you want a browner kind of sound. That's going to do the trick really, really nicely. But if you want a really super tight metal sound, you probably want to have the master volume low so that you can control the low end. And from there, play around with the EQ and... don't be afraid to turn the bass up on some models. This is quite a bright tone at the moment. I'll actually turn the bright switch off and compensate with the treble control. And then this guy. This is so important, the mid-range control. Don't just assume that the mids need to be low to sound good. Some amps have a lot of mid-range, like the Mesa Mark series. They have mega mids, so you don't need the mids to be very high, but something like this, experiment with turning it all the way up. And dial it back. And you can also play around with the fat switch. I really like that on the Friedman models. That kind of brings the mids into this really glorious kind of vintage thing, which sounds like a lot of great guitar tones from the 70s, I think. And the final thing to play around with in the EQ is obviously the depth control. Too much depth sounds thick and flubby, and too little depth can sound, uninspiring, thin, and fake. So with the Friedmans, around 6 is pretty good. And again, if you're listening to this with really, really low volume, it probably sounds flat and dull, but as you crank this, this absolutely roars and gives you that amp-like experience. So, while we're talking about dynamics, one control that I think is really, really handy here is the output comp control. I like to turn it to about, just give it a little bit to kind of simulate that, you know, when you play live and you mic up your guitar amp and you run it through front of house, you know, the front of house is probably going to limit what's coming in, or they might apply a little bit of compression, and the same thing in the studio. So I find this really nice, and this works great if you want to level out the difference between, you know, a super gainy sound, which, you know, this isn't super gainy, but, and your clean sound. I just rolled my volume control down there. That will help the clean sound still pop out in a mix if that's how you're controlling it. And the other thing that I think is so handy is this thing, the motor drive control. I set it around 4.5 is my go-to. Now you lose a little bit of volume with that one. And it's motor time constant. The higher it goes, sort of the looser and flubbier the amp gets. The lower it goes, the tighter it gets. And you can play around with the speaker drive and give it just a little bit if you want some of that thing happening. The other thing that plays into the dynamics is a supply sag. With this low, it's going to be pretty tight sounding, for use of a better term. If you crank it up, you get this really beautiful, joyous, squishy thing. So that's more of a, you know, as you play along with it, you'll notice the difference in your pick dynamics and things like that. So that's what I normally tweak when I'm trying to basically troubleshoot a tone that I think sucks. The final thing you can do as well is just choose a different cab. There's so many great sounding impulses in here. So, I mean, there's a Trad V60 one. What if we wanted something different? Let's go through these Ownhammer ones. What's this cab going to sound like? Oh, wow, that sounds completely different. That's a little bit thin in the low end, so you would go back and compensate with the low cut control. Let's try another one. Some of my favorite favorite ones are the ML ones as well. Let's have a look. Pre-roll of 55, why not? And what you can do is just flick through till you find an II you like. Now, of course, as you read these descriptions, you've got to know what these words mean. For example, R121 means Royer 121, which is a ribbon microphone. Ribbon mics obviously sound way different to dynamic mics. So, again, when we're talking about, hey, this sounds fake or this sounds digital, maybe you're just unfamiliar with the type of speaker or the type of microphone used when you're recording it. Some people love these dark sounding ribbon mics. Some people prefer the dynamics. Although I forget what an M160 is. That might be a condenser mic. I think it's a Beyerdynamic M160. Another M160. Let's find one with a 57. Here we go. And you know, the SM57 sounds great in a mix, but it can be a bit harsh on its own, and you might be interpreting that as sounding fake and digital. All right, I have ranted long and hard about this. If you've watched the whole video, thank you very much. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if there's any other tips you've got for dialing in realistic amp-like tones in your Fractal unit. And as always, if you dig it, hit subscribe, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks for tuning in.